So for Oregon, their first 5 games should be 5 wins. They should all be wins by double digits. A lot of things should happen. Oregon should have beaten Washington at least one of the last 3 times they met. They should have beaten Stanford on the road in 2021. They should have, right? You see how this goes from time to time. Can this Oregon team be different? Yep, absolutely. Dan Lanning has not, knock on wood. I'm knocking on wood before I even say it aloud, so don't accuse me of jinxing here. Dan Lanning is yet to lose to an unranked football team. I don't think that's going to change this year. But I wonder about that Boise State game, because Boise State is going to be the favorite in the Mountain West. They are the favorites in the Mountain West. And when you look at Oregon's first 5 opponents, it's Idaho, it's Boise State, it's at Oregon State, where they're a 20-point road favorite. That's a big line for a road game. But Oregon State got hit hard in the transfer portal, new coaching staff over there. Yeah, the Ducks should be able to go in and roll. First Big Ten game, I laugh every time. The first Big Ten conference game Oregon's going to play at UCLA. UCLA's got a first-year, first-time head coach in what is a reset season because they don't have any real talent. Like, all the talented players from last year's team, they're gone. They're gone. Now, they do have J. Michael Sturdivant at wide receiver, but they've got Ethan Garbers throwing him the football. Eric Bieniemy's calling the plays. Yeah, I don't anticipate UCLA being able to majorly slow down Oregon with the losses on the defensive side. They lost their 3 defensive linemen who were studs last year. They let their defensive coordinator walk across the street and go be the DC for USC, which I think is just ridiculous as a football program. Like, can you imagine? Oregon State wouldn't be the equivalent. If Oregon had a stud coordinator, Will Stein, for instance, and Washington was able to hire him away as the offensive coordinator, not as the head coach. That's one thing. Okay, you go from a coordinator to a coaching job. That's one thing. Imagine if Washington hired Will Stein as their offensive coordinator. What would you think as an Oregon fan? That's what UCLA did last year with D'Anton Lynn, which I think is absurd. And then Michigan State, they're also in year 1 of a rebuild. So the more I look at it, the more I think that Boise State is the biggest non-conference challenge that Oregon has, that it's going to be the toughest game, even though it's at home. And of the first 5, again, on paper, should present the best challenge. Their S&P Plus post-spring, which, factors in the transfer portal. It's an ESPN metric that Bill Connolly puts together and is an evaluation of returning production, recent recruiting, and there's one other factor, but those are the ones that matter the most. Boise State, top 40 team in the S&P Plus in college football. Oregon's number 3, by the way, in that particular metric. Georgia's 1, I think Ohio State or Texas is number 2, and Oregon is 3rd. So Boise State, statistically, from that metric alone, is the toughest team that Oregon plays. Then there's the lore component to playing Boise State. It hasn't gone well. The 3 games in my lifetime, 2007, I think it was, at Autzen Stadium, they came in and won. 2009, for those listening on podcasts, I did a simulated punch of myself because that's what everyone remembers about that game. The offense wasn't very good either, and the final score was like 19-8. And then there was Mario Cristobal's first ever game. Do you remember how that game began? Fun fact, if you don't. It began with a timeout. That was the first play of the Mario Cristobal era. A timeout following a kickoff. I will just let that stand for what it is. And also note, for those that are curious, Mario Cristobal has got a good team at Miami. Should win double-digit games this year. So just be prepared for that. I know plenty of Oregon fans relish in, Cristobal's struggles the last couple of years. Don't think they're going to have the same sorts of struggles this year. They win at least 9 games, at least, with the schedule that they've got set up. Should be able to win 10 or maybe even 11. Probably 10 is where they end up. But it hasn't gone well with Boise State. The good news is Dan Lanning knows, Dan Lanning's got ignorance is bliss. Dan Lanning has gone down to the desert twice and rolled over Arizona and Arizona State teams. And guess what? Oregon fans were probably a lot more worried going into those games than Dan Lanning was, because we've all seen how games in the desert have gone, or how games in the Bay Area against Stanford have played out in the past. And though last year's Stanford game was probably the worst start in the regular season against an inferior opponent, Oregon still ended up winning the game 42-6. That's the slight difference from 2021, where it was an outright loss to a 3-9 Stanford team. It was a 42-6 victory. So he, of course, doesn't know all of that. And I think there will be that sense amongst Oregon fans at Autzen that day of like, oh boy, it's Boise State. And by the way, they've got a good team. They have a somewhat unproven head coach because he took over for our old friend Andy Avalos in the middle of the season. He then won 3 straight games, got to the Mountain West Championship, and won that. And so they said, well, we got to give you the head job. And they've had a solid offseason, keeping their running back, Ashton Genty, who's a really good player. Malachi Nelson is pushing to be their starting quarterback, former 5-star USC recruit. He can really sling it. I've seen him throw in person before. If he figures it all out, he has got a lot of tools to be a great quarterback. I think that's the toughest game that Oregon plays in its first 5. But let me know what your thoughts are down below in the YouTube comments or on Twitter or via subtext if you're so inclined. Fun question to end today's show. This from Brian. Hey, Spencer, fellow Ducks fan and golfer. Love it. Could you go through the Big Ten football programs, likening each to a golf course in the state of Oregon? Get birdies, go Ducks. Well, not going to do all 18 teams. If you send me another note, Brian, or send me a note on Twitter, I could do all 18. But why don't I just do the ones that are going to be relevant in the Big Ten title chase here in Oregon's first season in the conference? I figured that was an appropriate way to go about this. So, Ohio State is Bandon Dunes. They're the most well-known. They live up to the hype. Michigan, Portland Golf Club. Hard-nosed, tough, physical, and you can feel like you're getting beat up if you don't play well at Portland Golf Club. Penn State is Waverly because they are iconic with a certain sort of view. The final 3 holes at Waverly are my favorite finish to a golf course anywhere. The whiteout at Penn State, that's an iconic view. USC is Oregon Golf Club for me personally because it's got a nostalgic feel. That's where I really learned to play while I was in high school. And USC comes with us from the Pac-12. And they, of course, went first. Oregon followed. And Oregon is, let's just say, better going into this year. And we'll see what USC does in 2025. But I don't think USC is a bad team this year. But they've got the nostalgic factor. Wisconsin's the Running Y Ranch, which I'm going to play on Sunday. That's my favorite course, and I like Wisconsin the most because Oregon's beaten them in the Rose Bowl twice, so can't hate that. Iowa is Big Meadow Golf Course at Black Butte. One-dimensional. Really good at that dimension, but it's one-dimensional. The one dimension of Big Meadow Golf Course is lined with trees. Iowa doesn't play any offense, but boy, they're really good at defense, and there are some really cool tree-lined holes at Big Meadow, and Iowa plays some really good defense. But that's kind of the fastball, like that's the crux of the course. Then Nebraska, who I think is a decent team this year, Oswego Lake Country Club, a course that I know exceptionally well, but has undergone some major changes recently. I played it not that long ago with some friends, and I think it makes the course better in a number of ways. I liked it before, but the changes that have come about make it even better, and I think that is why Nebraska and OLCC are a good fit. Because Matt Rule, I think, is making the sorts of changes that's necessary for Nebraska to get to where they want to go. Love the questions. Keep them coming. Thanks for making this your first listen. Make Locked On College Football your second. I'm hosting over there with a bunch of great guests that roll through all the time. Today, Alex Dono, Locked On Canes, Locked On ACC. He's great. He's just a great guest. Love the conversation. Go check it out every day with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.